Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something I think we can all relate to, turning those someday farm dreams into today action.
Okay,
We're digging into overcoming procrastination, an agribusiness action guide. I think this is something we can all relate to, even beyond farming.
absolutely. You're absolutely right. Procrastination, right, affects us all. But
Yeah,
it's especially interesting in the context of agribusiness because there are so many unique factors at play.
totally. The guide starts with a stat that just blew my mind. 60 to 70% of farmers who go through training programs never actually implement what they learn.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's a huge gap between knowledge and action. What do you think's going on there?
Well, the guy calls this the preparation action gap, and it has a lot to do with fear, especially for smallholder farmers, where the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah. Imagine putting your entire livelihood on the line to try a new crop or technology, only to have it fail. It's understandable why fear would hold people back.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. The guide even shared an anecdote about a Kenyan maize farmer who was hesitant to try drought-resistant seeds because he was so scared they wouldn't work.
Right. He couldn't bear the thought of losing everything.
It's that fear of loss, right, that's often more powerful than the potential for gain. It's called loss aversion. It's a cognitive bias that affects our decision-making.
Oh, interesting. I like that term.
Think about it. The pain of losing $100 is often stronger than the joy of gaining $200.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So even if a new innovation could potentially double a farmer's yield, that fear of losing everything can be paralyzing.
Totally. And it makes me wonder if perfectionism plays a role here too. You know?
Absolutely. Perfectionism is another major roadblock.
Like, maybe some farmers are waiting for the perfect conditions to start more
Mhm.
land, better equipment, guaranteed buyers.
Absolutely. The guide points out that the vast majority of smallholder farmers are working with basic tools, so waiting for everything to be ideal is just not realistic.
It's a good reminder to start where you are with what you have. The guide shared a really inspiring story about a Ugandan woman who started her poultry business with just 10 chicks and a makeshift coop. She
Wow.
didn't wait for the perfect conditions. She just started doing.
Exactly. And sometimes it's not just fear or perfectionism holding people back, it's the feeling of being completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, for sure. With so many choices, what to grow, where to sell, what technology to use,
Right.
it's easy to get stuck in analysis paralysis and never actually take action.
And I imagine larger systemic issues like land rights.
Right. And market access can add to that feeling of being stuck.
You're right. Those factors definitely create additional barriers that can contribute to hesitation.
So the guide seems to emphasize that procrastination isn't about laziness. It's often rooted in much deeper psychological and even systemic factors. That's really helpful to acknowledge because it removes the blame and shame that can come with feeling stuck.
Absolutely. And that's why the guide encourages starting with self-assessment. To pinpoint your personal procrastination patterns, it asks three really interesting questions.
Okay, I'm all about some good self-reflection. What are those questions? They might be helpful for our listeners, even if they're not in agriculture.
The first one is, do I delay tasks because the timing isn't right?
Ooh, okay.
It challenges that tendency to wait for the perfect moment, which, let's be honest, rarely exists.
That's so true. I know I'm guilty of that one sometimes. What's the second question?
The second question is, do I prioritize short-term chores over long-term goals?
Okay.
This gets at the struggle of balancing those immediate demands with our bigger aspirations.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture.
I think we all struggle with that one. Okay, so what's the third question? The final question is, am I waiting for external validation or resources?
Okay.
This is all about recognizing if you're holding back because you're waiting for someone else's approval.
Right? Or for someone to give you the funding or the green light. These questions are really insightful. Instead of just tough love about taking action, the guide actually helps you figure out why you might be stuck in the first place.
Exactly. And it emphasizes that you're not alone in feeling this way. These are common challenges.
Right.
To illustrate this, the guide shares the story of Joseph, a Tanzanian coffee grower who spent 2 years.
2 years. I could already feel my own procrastination gremlins getting excited about that timeline. What made him finally take action?
He realized he could start small by composting his kitchen waste to create organic fertilizer.
Okay.
It wasn't about having all the knowledge or waiting for the perfect moment. It was about taking that first step. And you know what? That first $50 sale gave him the confidence to keep going.
That's a great example of how those small wins can really snowball into something bigger. But I wonder, did he have to make a huge investment to get his composting operation going?
That's actually a key point the guide makes about agriculture. It offers a ton of entry points. So you don't necessarily need massive land or capital to get started.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that agribusiness advantage.
Well, instead of thinking you need to start with a huge farm, think about the entire value chain. Could you get started with a small-scale project, or even leverage your existing skills in a new way?
Okay.
The guide shares the story of Grace, a Kenyan farmer who was terrified of going into debt to build a commercial greenhouse.
So what did she do?
Instead of getting paralyzed by fear, she built a $100 tabletop greenhouse using recycled materials.
Wow, I love that. $100 greenhouse. Did it actually work?
It totally did. She started supplying fresh herbs to local restaurants, proving that you don't need a huge investment to make a real impact. It's about starting where you are with what you have.
Okay, I'm definitely getting inspired to think outside the traditional farm model. What are some other examples of those low capital entry points the guide mentions? I bet our listeners would love some specific ideas.
On the production side, think about growing microgreens in an urban setting, or, if you have a bit of land, start a small backyard garden and sell your extra produce to neighbors.
I love those ideas. They're perfect for people with limited space who are just starting to explore agriculture.
Exactly. And then there's the processing side. Do you have fruit trees? Dry the extra fruit for snacks, excess tomatoes from your garden. Make sauce or sun-dry them.
Oh, I've seen those sun-dried tomatoes at the farmer's market. They're delicious, and they go for a pretty good price.
See, so many possibilities. And you don't even have to be producing anything to get involved.
Right. What about connecting local farmers with buyers? Through online platforms, you're right, the marketing side is a whole world of opportunity. You could basically be a digital matchmaker for farmers and buyers. But I imagine the fear of failure is still a huge factor, especially when it comes to investing your hard-earned money. Did the guide address that at all?
It did. It really emphasized the importance of testing the waters before diving in headfirst. They even share a story of a Rwandan farmer who wanted to try mushroom farming, but was afraid to risk all of his savings.
So what did he do?
He only allocated 10% of his savings to a starter kit. Basically, he treated it like a pilot project.
That's a smart approach. So even if it didn't work out, he wouldn't lose everything. Is there a name for that strategy?
It aligns with something called the 10% rule, which is often used by investors.
Okay.
The idea is to only invest 10% of your resources into a new venture initially to minimize the risk. For farmers, this could mean testing a new crop on a small plot of land before committing your entire field.
Okay, so we've talked about identifying our procrastination patterns. We're inspired by stories of people starting small, and we've learned about this 10% rule for testing the waters. But we're not out of the procrastination woods yet, right? What are some specific strategies for actually breaking the cycle?
Well, the guide dives into that next, and it starts with something that might surprise you.
Okay, reframing your mindset. Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more about how mindset plays into all of this.
Procrastination often stems from a fear of judgment,
Okay?
especially in close-knit farming communities.
Right.
The guide points out that in these settings, failure can feel very public.
That makes a lot of sense. If everyone knows everyone, the pressure to succeed must feel immense.
It can, but the guide shares some great advice from Nigerian agripreneur Ada Osakwe. She encourages farmers to view criticism as data, not defeat.
That's a powerful reframe. It takes the sting out of criticism and turns it into a learning opportunity.
Exactly. They even illustrate this with the story of a woman in Zambia who started a fish farm. She faced a lot of skepticism from her community at first, but used that feedback to improve her fish feed formula.
It sounds like she turned a potential setback into a success. Do you think that kind of mindset shift is really possible for everyone, or are some people just naturally more resilient to criticism?
I think everyone has the capacity to reframe their thinking. It might take some practice, but the guide emphasizes that even negative feedback can be valuable.
Speaking of reframing our thinking, I'm curious about those behavioral nudges the guide mentioned. Those sound like interesting tools for tricking ourselves into taking action.
They are. One technique is called implementation intentions. It's all about linking a specific action to a specific trigger.
Okay.
So instead of saying, I'll work on my business plan sometime this week, you might say, if the sun is shining tomorrow morning, I'll spend an hour drafting my marketing strategy.
I could see how that would be helpful. It removes the vagueness and makes the task feel more concrete and manageable.
Right. And another nudge is public commitment. Announce your goal to a group,
Okay.
whether it's on WhatsApp, to a cooperative, or even just your family and friends. Accountability can be a powerful motivator.
Definitely. I know I'm more likely to follow through on something if I've told other people about it. Did the guide give any examples of that in action?
Yes. There's a story about a Ugandan youth group that had a 90% follow-through rate on their agricultural projects.
90%. That's amazing. I guess when you know others are watching and rooting for you, it gives you an extra push to keep going.
Absolutely. And there's one more tool the guide highlighted that I think has immense potential: technology.
That's interesting. I could see how technology could be really helpful, especially in a field like agriculture where there's always new information to learn and new ways to connect.
Exactly. It can be a game changer for staying organized, accessing information, and even connecting with others. For example, the guide mentioned an app called Farm Logs that helps farmers track their crop progress, manage finances, and even get weather alerts.
That sounds super useful. Having all of that in one place would definitely make things easier. Did they mention any other tech tools?
They also talked about AgriWallet, which allows farmers to access microloans via SMS.
Wait, microloans through text message? That's incredible. I bet that makes access to financing much easier, especially in areas where traditional banking is limited.
It does, and for those who find the idea of writing a business plan daunting, they even suggested using AI tools like ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, isn't that a chatbot? How could that possibly help with business planning?
It's actually more powerful than you might think. You can give it a prompt like, outline a poultry farm plan for 50 chickens, and it will generate a basic framework that you can then customize.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. It could be especially helpful for someone who's just starting out and doesn't know where to begin.
Exactly. And the guide emphasized that technology doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. There are tools out there for every level of tech experience and budget.
It sounds like the key is to find the tools that work best for you and your individual needs. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
You got it. And in addition to those individual strategies, the guide also highlighted the importance of something that has been a cornerstone of agriculture for centuries: collaboration.
Collaboration, I'm really curious to hear more about that. How does that fit into the whole conquering procrastination theme?
Well, think about it. Procrastination often thrives in isolation. We get stuck in our own hoods, overwhelmed by our own doubts and fears.
Yeah.
But when we collaborate with others, we share the load, gain new perspectives, and hold each other accountable. The guide even highlighted a traditional practice in East Africa called Amtata.
Tada, I've never heard of that. What is it?
It's basically a system of labor-sharing networks. Farmers come together to help each other with tasks like planting, harvesting, and even building infrastructure.
That sounds amazing. It's like a community barn raising. But for all aspects of farming, I love that idea of shared responsibility and mutual support. But I wonder, does that kind of system really work in the context of modern, more specialized agriculture?
That's a great question. The guide encourages adapting the UMTATA principle to today's world. So maybe it's not about physically working side by side, but finding ways to collaborate on things like buying inputs in bulk to get discounts,
Right.
sharing machinery to reduce costs, or even forming cooperatives to access larger markets.
Those are some really practical ideas. I can see how working together can not only help overcome those feelings of isolation, but also lead to some real economic benefits.
Absolutely. And there's a great example of that in the guide. A cooperative in Malawi was able to reduce their costs by 30% just by purchasing their supplies collectively.
Wow, 30%, that's a significant saving. It really highlights the power of collective action. But I think for some people, even the idea of reaching out to others can feel intimidating. Did the guide address that at all?
It did. It emphasized that collaboration doesn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as starting a conversation with a neighbor, joining a local farming group, or even just posting a question in an online forum.
That's a good reminder that building connections doesn't have to be scary or overwhelming. It's about taking those small steps to break out of isolation.
Exactly. And speaking of inspiration, the guide shared some incredible success stories of farmers who overcame procrastination and achieved some remarkable things.
I always love a good success story. It's so motivating to hear about real people who faced challenges but ultimately achieved their goals. Tell me about one that really stood out to you.
Well, there's Maria, a dairy farmer in Kenya. She dreamed of starting her own business, but kept putting it off because she was afraid of the costs and the risks involved.
I can relate to that fear. It's easy to get caught up in the what if and never take that first leap. What helped her finally get started?
She realized she didn't need to start big. She began by collecting just 5 liters of milk a day from her neighbors, and from that humble beginning, she grew her business to the point where she now supplies 500 liters per week to a processing plant.
That's incredible. It's a perfect example of how those small beginnings can lead to huge accomplishments. What's another success story that stood out to you?
There's the story of Yusuf, an entrepreneur from Nigeria who had a passion for gardening, but limited resources to start his own nursery. To overcome that hurdle, he started composting kitchen waste and selling it online.
That's brilliant. He turned a waste product into a valuable resource and created a business opportunity in the process.
Exactly, and the income from his compost venture allowed him to finally open his dream nursery. It's a reminder that you don't always need a huge investment to get started. Sometimes it's about finding creative solutions and leveraging your existing resources.
I love that. Resourcefulness and creativity are definitely key ingredients in overcoming procrastination. Did they share any stories about collaboration leading to success?
They did. They featured the Greenhouse Collective in Tanzania, a group of 5 women who wanted to grow strawberries for export. They couldn't afford to build a greenhouse on their own, so they pooled their resources and created a collective.
What a great idea. By working together, they were able to achieve something they couldn't do individually. It's a testament to the power of shared vision and collective action.
Absolutely. Their success has inspired other groups across Tanzania to adopt similar models. It shows how one small act of collaboration can have a ripple effect.
Okay, so we've heard some truly inspiring stories and learned a ton of practical strategies for overcoming procrastination. But I know our listeners are probably wondering, what can I do right now to get the ball rolling? Did the guide offer any concrete next steps?
It did. The guide recommends starting with a SWOT analysis.
Okay, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Right. It's a classic tool for business planning, but it's really helpful for any goal, even personal ones.
So how would a farmer use this for their agribusiness? I remember learning about SWOT analysis in school, but could use a refresher on how to apply it.
They gave a great example. Imagine a farmer wants to start growing organic vegetables. Their strength might be access to rainwater for irrigation.
Okay.
Their weakness could be limited marketing skills. The opportunity might be the rising demand for organic produce. And the threat could be seasonal pests.
Okay, I see. By listing those out, they can see where they need to focus. Like maybe they take a marketing course or research pest-resistant varieties.
Exactly. It's about getting strategic. And speaking of strategy, the guide all introduced a concept called the 15-minute rule.
Okay, tell me more about that. I love time management tips.
It's simple. Dedicate just 15 minutes each day to something related to your agribusiness.
Okay.
That could be researching potential buyers, testing your soil, or even just brainstorming ideas. The point is that consistency, even in small chunks, builds momentum.
It's like that saying, little by little, a little becomes a lot. We can apply that to almost anything, right?
Absolutely. And even if 15 minutes seems impossible some days, doing something is better than nothing.
True. And the guide also encouraged farmers to explore institutional support. Could you elaborate on what that means and how it could help? I think some people might overlook those resources or not even know where to start.
Definitely. It's about looking beyond your immediate network and tapping into support from government agencies, NGOs, or financial institutions. They specifically mentioned Kenya's AgriFund, which supports youth and women-led agricultural projects.
That's a great example. What about training or mentorship opportunities?
The guide recommended looking into programs from organizations like Heifer International. They provide livestock and agricultural training, which could be really helpful for folks who want to expand their knowledge.
That's great. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've learned about the psychology behind procrastination, heard inspiring success stories, and explored a whole toolbox of strategies for turning dreams into action. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think it goes back to that recurring theme of starting small. It's such a powerful antidote to procrastination because it makes everything feel less daunting.
Yeah.
You don't have to have it all figured out from day one.
Yes, and that goes hand in hand with testing the waters before making any huge investments. It takes the pressure off, allows you to learn as you go, and builds confidence along the way.
Exactly. There's a Ghanaian proverb that captures this sentiment perfectly. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
I love that proverb. It's a reminder that it's never too late to start. And even small actions can have a big impact over time. Think about it, even Rwanda's incredible agricultural transformation started with people planting gardens in their backyards.
It did. Those small gardens grew into something much bigger.
Speaking of resources to help you get started, the guide mentioned a fantastic free download called the 30-Day Agri-Action Plan. It provides step-by-step guidance for overcoming procrastination and turning your goals into reality. You can find it at www.agribusiness.co.zw.
I highly recommend checking it out.
So whether it's clearing a small plot of land, researching potential buyers, or contacting a local cooperative, we encourage you to take that first step today. You don't have to do everything at once. Just start somewhere.
Remember, every successful farmer was once a beginner. With the right mindset, strategies, and support, you can achieve your agricultural goals.
That's right, we believe in you. And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Happy farming.